I think Louisa might be joining us. Let's see. Oh, there's Nirmal.
Ni hao. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey,
Hi.
你好。
Ni hao.
Hi, Mr. Zhao Xu. It's my first time meeting him, even online.
Finally.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Uy with the Chinese American Museum, DC. We're the first and only museum in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story. We are one of the newest DC museums currently in development, with our next phase opening this fall. But good news, you can visit us and still see our progress for limited hours now, starting today, actually, each Thursday and Friday. So one of the reasons why you must drop by and see us is the new visual poetry exhibit, Wild Cranes, which opens today and runs through August 7th. So tonight, we are pleased to have the creative team behind this installation with us, and we are joining this Zoom call from all over the globe. So, just before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. If you would like to submit any questions for our panel, you could do so anytime in the chat or Q&A function in the control panel of your Zoom window. We'll do our best to address your comments or questions. And you should know that this event is streaming live on Facebook and is also being recorded. And typically we post them to our YouTube channel a couple days after the event. So welcome, everybody. The poet Nirmal Ghosh was born and raised in India. He's of German Indian heritage. He is a writer, journalist, and conservationist. And as you will see in some of the glimpse of the exhibit that we're showing tonight, he is truly an artist. He's U.S. Bureau Chief of the Straits Times of Singapore. Nirmal has been a foreign correspondent in Manila, New Delhi, Bangkok, covering everything from politics to coup d'etats to natural disasters, social environmental issues, and geopolitics all over Asia. So his journalism has won numerous awards. He was the Jefferson Fellow of the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii, and is a presidential election reporting fellow. He also hosts the weekly online video and podcast, Asian Insider. And he was president of the Foreign Correspondents Association of Thailand. So here to join us for a discussion about wild cranes is Nirmal Ghosh. So welcome.
Thank you, David. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Nice to see all of you in one frame.
So we're going to dive into your work a little in more detail later, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit about, what is the impetus of this work, and, what were the seeds of inspiration that started this whole effort?
Yeah, thanks. I have been writing poetry for quite some time, sporadically. I don't do it on a regular, weekly basis or even monthly basis, but sporadically. Mm-hmm. And I had some pieces which I had written over the years, and occasionally I post poetry on Facebook and whatnot, and friends encouraged me to publish. And I sort of I accumulated a small body of work. And a lot of the newer pieces were written during the pandemic last year because of the lockdown, and because I saw the pandemic, as many of us did, as a reminder of our mortality, of our limited time in this life, on this earth, and it sort of triggered thoughts of the confluence of circumstances, of coincidences, of life, of death. And I got this small body of work together, and I asked a friend who's a publisher whether there was a market for a slim volume of bilingual poetry, because I thought if I translate it into another language, and I've gotten great pleasure from reading poetry translated from other languages, from Chinese, Japanese, Persian into English. So I thought if I translate this into another language, it would expand the horizons of the poetry, obviously. And I thought of Chinese, and this publisher said there's not much of a market for that. And I sort of took that as a challenge. And I thought, well, you know, let's do something else with it, and let me just put the poetry on a wall. And I had all kinds of ideas, putting it on the side of a building, putting it on a billboard, all kinds of things, which were like obviously completely wild and way beyond my means. And then I decided to keep it sort of minimalist and elegant and classical. And I looked around for a translator into Chinese, and I contacted a close friend of mine who's a film director, and through her New York, I think, film school contacts in New York, she directed me to Ivy Chen. And I looked up Ivy's work very briefly, and from her work, I felt that, you know, this you need a poet to translate poetry, right? You can't. It's not a normal translation work. So I contacted Ivy, and then the whole, and I was still writing pieces at the time because we were all under lockdown and it was an anxious time and all that. I was full-time employed as a journalist. I was very lucky, but I kept on writing, and sort of accumulated this little body. And then it evolved into calligraphy because I was looking for a more visual element. The more visual, the better. And I've always been fascinated by ancient calligraphy, old calligraphical arts, right? And so then, you know, Ivy sort of got hold of Zhao Xu, and we passed everything to him, and he agreed to do it very kindly. And he worked for a long time doing this, all these scrolls, and they came in a huge sort of almost like a barrel. They came via Ivy in Atlanta, then they came to me in DC, and Ivy cataloged them. And then came the challenge of actually putting them all together, unifying them. I mean, how do you display calligraphy? I mean, it's okay to display a calligraphic scroll, but the English has to also go somewhere because not that many people can read calligraphy, right? So it was a challenge to sort of put them all together. And that's where Tanya came in. Tanya, of course, is my own daughter, I'm proud to say. And she's an amazing artist and photographer and designer, it was just the right person for this job. And what was very interesting in this job is because we were working across 2 different countries, sometimes 3 different countries. I mean, we were all over the globe and working in different time zones and different languages, and it required a significant degree of trust. And I think that trust came through between all of us, and that is what actually saw the project through to its fruition. So these are actually meditations. I have scribbled them in the margins of boarding passes. I have scribbled them on the margins of notebooks when I'm out in the field somewhere, and I've written them, you know, in the middle of the night or whenever the urge strikes me. So yeah, that's.
I imagine them being a great balance for you when you have to have such an objective approach as a journalist, to be able to, you know, to have this subjective outlet.
Yeah, it's therapeutic to write creatively. I've written creatively for some time. I've written a novella actually some years ago. So I do write creatively quite a lot, and I've got another book coming out in February. And it's therapeutic, and it's the whole project became a sort of secret garden to which one escaped, to escape all the negativity of the grief of the pandemic, rising geopolitical tension between the US and China, for example. That wasn't the primary motivator, but it turned out to be an interesting angle. I mean, we've had, and I was reporting on this all the time, how Asian Americans, or anyone who looks vaguely, you know, Chinese in the popular imagination, have been just subjected to harassment and prejudice and even assaults because of the rising and documented anti-China sentiment. So I thought it would be nice to also highlight an amazing aspect of Chinese culture, and also display it very large visually, so that if one didn't know the background, you wouldn't actually know who has written the original poetry. Perhaps the calligraphy has been translated into English, and it doesn't really matter. It should not matter, because these are all the sentiments expressed in the poetry. Some of them are just vignettes, but some are, I mean, sentiments which are basically universal to everybody: death, coincidence, love, destiny, loss, that kind of thing.
Well, you know, it's certainly been a tough couple of years politically, the pandemic, isolation. Do you think that has helped you focus on the art form, or do you think that it's made it more challenging?
I think it helped me focus. I think that's a good question. I think it helped me focus, and I think the circumstances last year sort of actually, in some way, sort of unleashed a lot of creativity and set me free in some respect. You know, I felt that with the uncertainty, the inherent uncertainty of our very existence in this life is highlighted by the pandemic, was highlighted by the pandemic. And it is important to express oneself and say what one has to say without delay, because you don't know. None of us actually knew whether we would even be alive the next week,
right,
at some stage, right? And I also thought, look, if I had this idea, and then it sort of evolved. And I said to myself, look, it is actually, at some point I decided, oh, actually I can do this. I can actually get this done. And after I crossed that point, I didn't want to sort of do nothing about it. And 5 years later, look back and say, oh, that was a great idea, but I didn't do it, you know, and possibly regret it. Right. So yeah, that was the pandemic effect.
You know, your career has been so uber international. You know, I think that you've it's really given you that global perspective. Do you think that you could have done a project like this, especially that, you know, has the feeling of, you know, the crossroads of so many different cultures coming together? Do you think that, you know, if you were a domestic reporter in the Midwest, do you think that you could have done this project the same way, or do you think it's really shaped the way, you know, your art? I
think definitely all of the above shaped the project and shaped my whole approach to it. And of course, if you're a reporter in the Midwest, you can write your own poetry about the Midwest and your own issues and all that, which is fine. But yes, you're right. I mean, I have, because of all the stuff one has seen and covered as a journalist, and the traveling and all that, the different cultures I've interacted with, the mind gets very crowded with influences. And a lot of them sort of weave together and juxtapose and contribute to the final effect. So yeah, I think certainly Wild Cranes is a culmination of that.
Nirmal, perhaps, you know, this would be a good time for you to introduce Ivy, Tanya, and Zhao Xu.
Okay, so Ivy was the next step in the project. So Ivy Chen, well, you know, I mean, I'm tempted to say she needs no introduction, because I looked up her website, and, you know, I was hugely impressed again. As I said, you know, it takes a person of a certain kind of sensitivity, and I was very, very lucky. This whole project has been very, very lucky that I was put in touch with Ivy very early on. She was the first translator I was put in touch with, and it just clicked into place. So the stars sort of aligned, and it carried on in that vein. You know, again, it was trust and momentum. So Ivy, perhaps Ivy, you can, I sort of got in touch with Ivy when she was living in Atlanta, and now she's back in New York, but she was in New York before that. And so we went back and forth and chatted a lot and all that. But Ivy, perhaps you should, you know, say something about how you came, what you saw in this project, and then maybe we can segue to Zhao Xu. What was the next step? You're muted, Ivy. You have to unmute. You have to unmute, Ivy.
So sorry.
Got it. Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank David and Luisa for hosting such a wonderful opening. I went on Monday and I was blown away by this beautiful space and the hospitality. And so I just came back from DC, feeling very transformed. There are multiple layers of transformations in this project, and this is the last one I just experienced from the space back to my home in New York. And so it's really nice to see everyone again online and carry on the conversation. We had the breakfast with Nirmal and Tanya this morning before I left, and I asked Nirmal what question he likes to ask now, so I could prepare. And he asked, "How do you translate the poems faithfully?" And I said, "Well, that question has been asked way too much. Let's talk about something else." And so I hopped on the train, and on the train I started thinking about ideas. I felt like when my body was on the move, my mind also wanders. And so I wrote something that's not, I don't know what it is, but maybe similar to poetry. And I'll just honor that moment. So I feel life is a series of failed translations. Our clumsy effort turning ingredients into food, water into soup, love into action, ideas into words, days into dreams, dreams into reality, and our immigrant stories into an American memory. Life is not what's faithfully translated. Life is what's lost in translation. In the cracks of this imperfection, beauty emerges and transforms us. And this is what this show, Well, the Cranes, is about. So when Nirmal approached me last year to translate these poems, I felt there's a profound depth in the simplicity of his work that connected me deeply. And I was curious to find out more about this human behind these lines, who he is, what's his past, what's his state of mind, what's his journey been like. And I wanted to understand that mind behind the words and how to relate it to my own reality as a new immigrant, uprooted again and again, and in the process forming very imperfect understanding of the world and myself, yet still carry on and trust strangers and kindness. And through this whole year, we went through the pandemic, the election, and the US-China war, and we kept this long distance communication and cultivated our friendship, and respected our disagreements, and slowly, quite organically, transformed the initial simple ideas into these more elaborate visual representations. And then when Mr. Zhao Xu came to the picture, it was all very straightforward, because I translated an art catalog for him in the past. So we've already built that connection, although we've never met in person. But he's a very trustworthy artist who has done incredible work honoring the Chinese calligraphy art. So we sent him the words, and he transformed them onto rice paper with ink and brush and his incredible artistry. And he added a lot of personality to the calligraphy pieces, because each poem he used a different style, and really trying to bring each stroke alive and make the lines dance. in its own reason, adding his own interpretation and understanding. And that's another layer of transformation. And then after all these poems were done, we had like 3 dozens of them. So it's a lot of work and ink. And we asked him to ship it to the US. And then we relied on the masterful skill of Tanya to bring this very raw calligraphy on rice paper onto pure white canvas that resembles a rice paper, but without all the crumbles and imperfections, which you have to see in person in a museum. And you can take a close look how the texture resembles rice paper. And that adds another layer of beauty through Tanya's understanding of this work. And she also added the English text to the bottom that's not overwhelming the Chinese calligraphy, but to complement them. And so that's, I think, I never saw anything like that before. So it's a very original and it's beautiful. And so through so many steps of journeying, translating and transforming and recreation, we finally culminated all these efforts in a space which we just visited with our guests and friends and members and donors a couple of days ago. And it was a whole different level of final arriving where you can actually see and feel this work word by word in person and wander through the space as if you can see a flock of wild cranes flying into the evening, and that feeling of taking off and completion is quite satisfying. And I talk so much, but I think most of the work has been done by Zhao Xu and Tanya and Nirmal. My role is just the invisible ninja. I make sure there's no translation error, but all the other amazing work, they have bore the brunt of it. So I'll give time to Zhao Xu next.
And can you take us through with Zhao Xu, because you'd have to do some translation, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, so 赵旭，轮到你了。So you're asking to.
我主要是我不知道需要我讲些什么呀。
Do you have any question you would like to ask Zhao Xu? I can translate.
Yeah, well, I would like to ask him how he saw the work when he was actually doing it, because and to show us some part of his studio. What were the feelings when he was executing this project?
OK， 就您在写这些作品的时候，这过程是怎么样的？你有什么感受？有什么自由挥发的地方？我们简单的讲一讲。
其实用这个书法和这个宣纸啊，这种毛笔这种书写的这个办法呀，来书写这个新诗，其实不是一个非常通常的一个形式。你通常我们都写些古诗嘛，或者写古文嘛，什么之类的。那么写这个新诗的时候，它还是有一个过程。这个过程呢，就是
你稍等，我先翻一下哈。
哎，好的。
So he said, it is not a common practice to write contemporary poems in ancient Chinese calligraphy. Typically, we write ancient Chinese poems and verses in calligraphy. So that's his first impression. And in order to do so, he's going to tell us what he did. 您接着说。
那么其实在书写的过程当中呢，首先就是要对这个诗啊，稍等一下啊。 因为您那边现在的时间啊是这个傍晚的时间，我现在这个时间是早上要工作的时间了，所以这个事儿都交织在一起了，很抱歉。
It is the start of the work day, so he has a lot of work issue to do, and he apologizes.
That's okay.
那个，那么，首先呢，就是要对诗这个特别感谢刘瑜了，把这个诗翻译成中文，然后我们能了解一个诗词的一个大意，然后呢，我们再去根据这个每个诗的不同的含义吧。我在书写的过程当中呢，其实开始还是比较保守的，就是我只是拿普通的这个字啊，把这个诗抄在宣纸上。后来呢，对这个诗的意思呢理解的越来越多了之后呢，我会根据不同的这个，因为尺寸是固定的嘛，根据不同的诗的意思，我们会有一个自由的发挥。比如说后来会有一些形式上的变化，并不是抄的非常满，有的可能这一段会少一点，那一段会多一点，字会大一点，字会小一点，会有一些形式上的发挥。这些发挥基本上还是根据诗本身的意思，包括这个每一个句子的长短来的啊。
So in the beginning, he read the translation and copied them verbatimly on the rice paper, just to get familiar with them. And slowly, when the meaning started to emerge and different poems styles started to feel differently, he added a lot more creativity and abandonment. So he would because we gave him quite a standard measurement to fit the museum space. So he had to dance within a limit. So he would make artistic choices, where to stop the line, how to create more space and balance each other in different poems.
辛苦刘瑜了哈，
你最辛苦了。
我不辛苦，我不。那个，总之呢，这是一个就是非常有意思的一个尝试，也是一个非常有意思的一个怎么说呢？一个过程，因为我从来没有做过像这样的一个新诗的和一个书法这样一个对照的一个展览。基本上我们这个相对来说比较传统的呢，就是这边有个画，然后这边有一片这个题字，或者是单独的这个书法。但是你像这个像以这么多的新诗为主的这样一个展览形式，确实我是头一次参与的，也是非常非常荣幸。
He said it's very refreshing and honored for him to try this very new way of expressing these contemporary poems in calligraphy, which he's never done before. He typically do traditional art plus caption or pure calligraphy work. And so this is also an eye-opening experience for him. And he feels really grateful to have done that.
Thank you very much. This is extraordinary, actually. I mean, this is the first time I am also meeting Zhao Xu virtually. It's amazing how this collaboration, actually, everyone brought their own energy and skills and into this unified collaborative, and it's just extraordinary. Tanya, can I sort of move to you now? And I think you're going to show us, can tell us a little bit about how you put all these elements together. You chose, the paper you chose, and then show us a couple of shots of the installation.
Yeah. So, yeah, after all of this beautiful stuff was created, I had the honor of putting it all together and unifying it into something physical and aesthetic. And the main, I guess the main point was to keep it as minimal as possible, because the calligraphy obviously speaks for itself and is an art form in itself. And so does the English and the wording of the English too. So with that, the scrolls came from China to Maryland to DC to then me, and then we got them scanned, high resolution scanned, and then I digitally did all the cleaning up and everything, with still staying 100% true to the calligraphy. And then, yeah, and then worked on the layouts to make them as minimal as possible and as clean as possible so that just the work itself can speak for itself. And then the paper we used to imitate rice paper as close as possible was a Japanese kozo paper, which I believe is derived from mulberry. And it's actually quite delicate and beautiful. And then after that, just the mounting and sizes of everything was, we took our time and just planned it out, and it all came together quite nicely. So should I show
Yes, please.
photos of the, can I share my screen? I'm gonna share my
Mhm.
screen. So this is, can everyone see?
Yes.
So yeah, this is just a few photos of the gallery itself. The building, the space is beautiful. The photo on the left is what you see before you enter the room. And then the right is our very nice title piece. And the next one is just photos of the room by itself in the day and in the evening. It's a very peaceful experience walking in the room yourself, to go around and to read each one. And I think actually the room itself was actually quite beautiful for that as well. And yeah, just some photos of the sides, left and the right sides. The longer, bigger poems were quite large on the left side, and then we had the little ones on the right, and I think it kind of flowed very nicely. And this is not a great photo on the left, but it's just so you see a little bit of the texture. And the photo on the right is actually the grain of the kozo paper, which you can obviously see much better if you see it with your own eyes and stand right in front of the pieces.
Can you tell us a little bit about that paper? Like what is it comprised of?
Mulberry,
Mhm.
which is mulberry bark, I believe it is. And I forget where it originated from, but it's quite popular in Japanese paper, and I think also some Chinese paper.
Mhm.
This is sort of silky finish.
Yeah, it's a silky type, and ours was a little bit thicker because it had to be like flat paste mounted on a board, so it had to be a bit more sturdy. But yeah, I just thought it was a beautiful paper and quite suitable for the project. So the calligraphy actually sat quite nicely on it as well. Yeah, so yeah, it all came together really nicely and like unified and harmonized quite well. I think we're all happy with that, and it was great working together and seeing each other virtually. And it's funny, Ivy, you said we three of us had breakfast this morning, and now in like snap of a finger we're back online again. Like it was such a beautiful experience. This past, was it the weekend? I don't know. This past week. Yeah, and should we, I wanted to just, the next slide is to go into just some of the actual poetry. So you can
Go ahead.
Maybe you can read some.
So the first one, on the frozen river in the cold dawn, a raven croaks. There are spirits here. So this was, I wrote this in Oslo. It was obviously very cold, and I went out for a walk in the morning, and I sat by this frozen river, and it was absolutely silent. Of course, in winter in Scandinavia, you can imagine there's nothing. It's very, very quiet. And then just out of this silence, there was a raven croaked. So I just wrote exactly what happened. And to me, it sounded like there was this other being, this other presence there. And a raven would croak, you know, give a territorial croak, or call out to another raven, or even call out a warning, and it may have, you know, seen me and reacted. So I wrote that. It was a very interesting moment, so I wrote it down. So maybe Ivy, you can say that in Chinese.
在黎明的寒气中，冰河上一只鸭在叫，这里有一些灵魂。
Thank you. 谢谢. The second one, how long can one gaze into the green hills between curtains of rain? The dribble of water down the gutter measures our minutes on this earth. This I wrote when I was, some years ago actually, up in Shan State in Burma, in Myanmar. And I was way up in the hills, and I dropped in to see this old bungalow, old colonial bungalow where some English colonel had lived, and it was preserved. There was nothing else around. It was all green hills, jungle, rice fields and all that, and there was this beautiful bungalow. So as I was looking around the bungalow and taking some photographs, it started raining, and it started really raining. I mean, it was the monsoon. It was bucketing down like curtains of rain. And we had no choice but to sit, me and the guy who brought me there, my local guide. We had no choice but to sit there on that veranda of the bungalow for something like 3 hours and just watch the rain and listen to the water flowing down the gutters and down the hill. And it was 3 hours of, you know, no mobile phone connection, no internet, nothing. So it was a very interesting experience, and, you know, the mind sort of wandered and thought of all these existential issues. And I thought, I remember looking down literally at the gutter, which was right next to me, and seeing the water flowing down it. And it just reminded me of, you know, of life. And this was life. I was looking at life over there. I was experiencing it in the full by sitting there, no distractions, nothing. Sitting there and watching the rain and listening to the rain. It was a sensory experience. And I tried to put that down. Ivy, you want to say it?
透过雨帘，你能望青山多久？雨水滴入沟槽，倒数我们在地球上的一分一秒。
Do next.
Next.
Thanks, excuse me. In the green hills of far Mindanao, she walks barefoot, sensitive as a bird to the first drops of rain. This, I used to travel a lot in Mindanao, which is in the southern Philippines. Very tropical, full of, you know, bamboo, lush green jungles, a lot of rice again, pineapple plantations, all kinds of things. And also a lot of conflict, and it's a tropical fruit, amazing tropical fruit in Mindanao. It's a fascinating area. And so I sort of imagined, I remembered all the images that I had seen, the people I had met, and it's sort of juxtaposed in my mind, in the image of a young girl walking barefoot in that environment, or in that lush green environment. And I do remember the storms in Mindanao, the heavy rain again. And that brought up this thought that she would be, in my mind, she would be sensitive to the first drops falling on her skin as she walked barefoot, you know, in this environment. Ivy?
在棉兰老岛深处的青山里，光着脚走路，灵敏如一只鸟，直到天空落下第一滴雨。
So the second one, I held you close, your small warm body, your beating heart, and then you taught me how to let go. Still, if only I could protect you forever. So this was written, this is the dilemma of parenthood, anyone who's a parent, right? This was actually written for Tanya. And it's a dilemma of a parent because, which I think every parent knows, your child grows up, your baby grows up, but you have held that baby and nurtured that baby, and then you see it blossom, and it is your duty and to help that person to grow up and blossom and prepare to go out into the world and all that. And you have to let go. I mean, that's in the nature of things. You have to let go for them to truly go out and bloom. And yet somewhere inside you, you always want to somehow protect. You know, if you could, you would wave a magic wand and protect your children forever. So I was just trying to express that small dilemma or paradox of parenting.
我把你抱紧，你小巧温暖的身体，你跳动的心。接着，你教我如何放手。可是，只要我能永远保护你。
In the chill of the morning fog, the wet stone garden path, and I remember the red roses by the gates of Rottimay. So this was actually literally in the chill of the morning fog. It was a fall day in DC, and it had rained, and it was very foggy. And I was walking, I think, nearby. I was, or maybe perhaps it was Maryland, and I was walking on these wet flagstones in the garden. And they were wet and gleaming, and it sort of triggered a memory in my mind of this cottage up in the mountains in India, in Darjeeling, where a lot of the best tea comes from, right? That same Darjeeling. So when I was young, I used to go and stay in this cottage called Rottimay. It's a Scottish name. It was a colonial era cottage. It was probably built and named by someone from Scotland because a lot of Scots came out and ran the tea gardens in that part of India. So I had I don't remember many details, but my memory works somewhat photographically. I sort of remember particular scenes, particular moments of great significance stay with me. And I remembered almost exactly a similar time. Fog, early morning, it was cold, it was in the mountains, there were flagstones in the path, they were wet from the dew, and there was this wrought iron gate. And by the gate, there were these roses. Winter roses were blooming, and they were very blood red. So it just triggered this memory, and I wrote about it because I'm also fascinated by the fact that certain memories can just stay with you and come back to you, repeatedly.
在晨雾的凉意中，花园石径被打湿。我想起那些红玫瑰开在罗西梅的门边。
Those are the poems that we're sharing.
Okay. So, these pieces are really, as I said, I scribbled them normally it just takes a few seconds to write these short ones. And I might refine them, a couple of words here and there over a period of time. But these come to me in a few seconds, and I sort of think like visually a lot, and I try and bring that into my writing. So paint a picture, paint a scene, or paint a situation. I try and do that in my writing. So, over to you, David.
5 minutes. Would you like to see Zhao Xu's studio?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
赵旭，您想要带我们参观一下你的工作室吗？那个声音打开。
好的，没问题。
Okay, no problem.
这个就是我在大连的工作室。
This is studio in 大连。
对，这个墙面呢，就是我平常画画的一个墙面，这是就是磁铁的，这都是宣纸的。我直接把这个画就放在这个墙面上去绘制啊。
That's
这
a
是
paper.
这是我其他的一些这个字啊，这是我其他的一些字，嗯，
有小
当然
楷哈。
对，小楷。当然，这工作室里还有一些我们藏品，比如说这个是大鱼鼎啊，大鱼鼎的一个拓片，这很著名的一个青铜器，然后还有一些
from a very famous
对，然后这还有一些杂七杂八的一些片段的记忆的东西，都是一些老先生们写给我的。但这里也有一些很有意思的，这是那个法国大文豪雨果的书信啊，这是我的藏品。
Oh my God, that's the Eagle's letter, handwritten letter. 这你收藏的？
对，这是我收藏的，这都是我收藏的。就大概这个是工作室的一个状态啊。
That's his workstation.
这是一个茶台，这还有一些书法。我这工作室相对来说比较乱啊，相对来说比较乱。
It's a little messy.
这个今天很不容易，就是大连因为连续下了1周的雨，这个刚刚出太阳了啊，刚刚出太阳了，非常好。
外面是竹子吗？
外边不是，外边是梧桐树。
those are London pines.
外边是梧桐树啊，阳光明媚，阳光明媚。
Now.
这是反正这是一部分书吧，一部书籍什么之类的。这个墙上挂的这些呢，也都是我的藏品啊。
The art walls are all his collections.
对，而我是个佛教徒，这是犍陀罗时期的这个雕塑。
statue.
对，然后这是日本艺术家平山裕夫的作品啊。
A Japanese artist.
对，然后这个是我们这个吴大羽先生的作品啊，是著名的油画家。
吴大羽 very famous.
对，就大概其实这么一个状态吧。反正我平时这个在大连时期，我工作都是在这儿的啊。
When he stays in 大连 he works here. 那个山上美术馆也是在这儿吗？
对，你们需要参观吗
？Let me ask. So he also has this is his work studio, but he also has a museum on the same site. It's called the Museum on the Mountains. Do we have time to take a peek? Or should we go continue?
David,
他那话筒没有开。
David, you're muted.
话筒没有开。
David, you're still on mute.
Darn that mute button. I think we only really have a few minutes, so if is it close by? I think, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's 那我们可能时间不够多，那非常感谢您带我们参观你的工作室。
Someone has just asked a question for Zhao Xu.
他要问你一个问题。
Could you tell us more about the style you used for the second poem shown today, Shan State, Burma? What tradition does it belong to, and why did you choose it for this poem?
Which one?
Oh, that's the one about the water running down the gutter.
Okay. 您记得您写的那首《透过雨帘》？If we could see the visual, that would help. 您记得那首《透过雨帘》你能凝望青山多久那首诗吗？我们想听你讲讲，这首诗用的是什么？是你的那个灵感来源，然后用的是
过了，上一张图片。
Is this the right one?
No, the previous one.
再上一张，再上，哎，对，这个右
The
侧这
second
个，
one on the screen, yes.
右边这个，您跟我们讲讲。
需要我讲讲就是创作的感受吗？
然后你为什么选择这种字体？然后
其实我对
他们
这个，其实我对这首诗最后的一句啊，我其实，特别有感受吧，就是倒数我们在地球上的1分1秒，就是其实这首诗里头是对这个人类的这个生存意识和这个和一个大环境的一个关怀。那么我其实这幅字啊写的过程当中啊，只蘸了3次墨。你看，比如第一个字，还有这个沟槽的沟字，相对来说这个颜色会相对比较深一点啊，大概就蘸了3、4次墨，就是追求一种它这个一气呵成的一个状态。
明白了。
您先翻译这一句，然后我再往下讲。
He said that he was particularly moved by the last line. The dribble of water down the gutter measure our minutes on this earth. It really reminds him of our mortality and the smallness of our life. And so he paid particular attention to capture that feeling. And in his entire poem, which is 4 lines, he dipped the brush in the ink 3 times. The first time is the first word, and the second time is the last word, 4th line from the left. So you can see it's stronger because the ink is rich, but he tries to finish it in a couple breaths so they don't get broken. That's how he did this piece.
另外呢，就是书写的这个过程当中呢，这是因为他对这个人类终极问题的思考在，所以我们选择的这个书体呢，相对来说比较飘逸一些，而且会由一个由浓到淡，由深到浅，这样一个过程，其实也是代表了一个时间的一个推移在里边。
说得真好。He said that because the poem addresses eternal issue of life and death, mortality, so he wants the lines to have fluidity to it. You can feel the dance movement through the lines that captures the trajectory of our life that's limited and timed. And so that's why you see the contrast of a stronger and lighter touch on the paper.
There's a follow-up question from Rachel. Is there a name for this style?
这个字体有名称吗？
行书。
It's called a 行书, which we try to connect the words unbrokenly, and we skip a lot of strokes to highlight the continuity and the breadth and the fluidity of the characters. 行书 is in contrast to 楷书, which is very stroke by stroke illustration of the character, which is much more readable. 行书 is not very readable. That's why it's difficult for even a Chinese to read the calligraphy, but it captures that spirit much stronger than if we were to make it more readable.
There was an earlier question. Someone would like to know if the calligraphy being modern oriented, how has this affected the historical meaning of the crane, if at all? Or should the beholder of their combined story just focus on the human condition? I see.
Let me read the question again.
people want to know if the calligraphy, if it's modern, has it affected the historical meaning of the crane? My understanding is it's not modern, right? That it's more of a classical.
It's a classical art form.
Yeah.
The poems are contemporary.
Yeah.
That's why it's so interesting.
So I think that question might have it reversed.
这位
Yeah, I should add something about the title, the choice of the title, Wild Cranes. That is not a piece in itself, of course. You know, it's just a motif. And the reason I named it, I thought of Wild Cranes was that as David, you mentioned, I'm involved in wildlife conservation as well in another life. And I've done a lot of work on cranes, and I've filmed cranes and been in films on cranes and all that. And cranes are celebrated in a lot of Asian countries for their beauty, their incredible mating dances. They're legendary. They are, often depicted in by folk artists and poetry, and they pair for life and they migrate long distances. And bird migration is an example of, to me, of the fact that our boundaries, our cultural and political boundaries in particular, are basically artificial. Migratory birds know nothing about which country they're in, and cranes migrate thousands of miles from North Asia to South Asia. So that was the thought behind the title.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and this has been an amazing Zoom call, because I think this is the most geographically spread out that we've had. But you really need to come and see this exhibit in person, because we did a great job trying to put the photos up there, but it doesn't really do it justice. So the Wild Cranes exhibit will be open from July 15th to August 7th at the Chinese American Museum, DC. Our website is ChineseAmericanMuseum.org. .org is important. And starting today, we'll be open for limited hours, Thursday and Fridays, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And on August 6th, we're also part of DuPont Circle's First Friday. It's like an evening event, so look that up and look on our website for more information. But thank you to Nirmal Ghosh, Ivy Chen, Tanya Ghosh, Zhao Xu, and Louisa Sorkness for getting this all together. And we are so honored to have this show at the museum. It really is, our museum, because it is a work in progress, it's really a joy to have something so perfect and finished hiding on the third floor. But and it really is, I think you'll find yourself at peace in that room. It's a nice respite. If you would like to share this event with a friend, look for the recording on our YouTube channel in the upcoming days. And thank you. Nirmal, I don't know if you wanted to close out with anything?
Oh, just thank you very much, and thank you to you, David, and everyone at the museum for recognizing the potential and of this whole project. And I think it's a remarkable, as I said earlier, a remarkable example of synergy, of everybody bringing some sort of energy, and it becomes an incredible unified project, and the result is absolutely beautiful and frankly just as I intended. So I'm very pleased with it, and I hope a lot of people can see it in person.
Thank you so much. Well, good night, everybody, and we hope to see you at the museum.
Thank you
Good night,
so
and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
谢谢，谢谢。
赵先生，谢谢您，再见。
Bye.